Hi guys, it's Miss Keeter. I'm going to go ahead and read chapter 1 because I had some concerns that it was a little fast for some people, and also I think I need to explain some of the things as we go, like vocab terms, etc. So I'm going to try and go in about 10 to 15 minute intervals of reading and post them in a row. But hopefully you guys will be able to use this more easily. We'll find out. And take a look at the chapters. There's 12 chapters. Because there's so few, that means they're longer. So it is important that you use your time management skills, okay, to make sure that you are, in fact, doing the assignments when you need to be. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the sound of the shell. And I'm going to make this larger for you guys. And I'm going to go ahead and read. What I suggest you do is jot down some questions that you might have, and then we can have a discussion after each chapter. Okay? So, the sound of the shell, chapter 1. The boy with fair hair lowered himself down the last few feet of rock and began to pick his way toward the lagoon. Though he had taken off his school sweater and trailed it now from one hand, his gray shirt stuck to him and his hair was plastered to his forehead. All round him, the long scar smashed into the jungle was a bath of heat. He was clambering heavily among the creepers and broken trunks when a bird, a vision of red and yellow, flashed upwards with a witch-like cry, and this cry was echoed by another. "Hi," it said. "Wait a minute." The undergrowth at the side of the scar was shaken, and a multitude of raindrops fell pattering. "Wait a minute," the voice said. "I got caught up." The fair boy stopped and jerked his stockings with an automatic gesture that made the jungle seem for a moment like the home counties. The voice spoke again. "I can't hardly move with all these creeper things." The owner of the voice came backing out of the undergrowth so that the twigs scratched on a greasy windbreaker. So in case you missed the introduction, we have this group of boys that are from a private school who they were thrown on a plane in, I think it was London, and they were sent away because this is during the time of the Cold War. Okay. You guys have probably heard a lot about the space race, etc. When countries were threatening primarily the United States and the USSR, which is Russia, to bomb each other. So in this book, the author decided to have that actually happen. And so these boys are escaping pretty much a world war and end up crash landing on a deserted island where clearly some of them know each other, some of them do not. So we have two characters in the beginning kind of waking up, walking around, trying to figure out what happened. And they don't know each other, but they're getting to know each other. All right. Twig scratched on a greasy windbreaker. The naked crooks of his knees were plump, caught and scratched by thorns. Okay, so this is our first description of Piggy. The naked crooks of his knees were plump, caught, and scratched by thorns. He bent down, removed the thorns carefully, and turned around. He was shorter than the fair boy and very fat. He came forward, searching out safe lodgments for his feet, and then looked up through thick spectacles, glasses. "Where's the man with the megaphone?" The fair boy shook his head. "This is an island. At least I think it's an island. That's a reef out in the sea. Perhaps there aren't any grown-ups anywhere." The fat boy looked startled. There was that pilot, but he wasn't in the passenger cabinet. He was up in front. The fair boy was peering at the reef through screwed-up eyes. Do that for me now. Make your eyes all screwed up. Okay, usually it's a face I personally make when I can't see. Remember, they have sun shining in their eyes. All of them other kids, the fat boy went on. Some of them must have got out. They must have, mustn't they? The fair boy began to pick his way as casually as possible toward the water. He tried to be offhand and not too obviously uninterested, but the fat boy hurried after him. Aren't there any grown-ups at all? I don't think so. The fair boy said this solemnly, but then the delight of a realized ambition overcame him. In the middle of the scar, he stood on his head and grinned at the reversed fat boy. No grown-ups! The fat boy thought for a moment. That pilot. The fair boy allowed his feet to come down and sat on the steamy earth. He must have flown off after he dropped us. He couldn't land here, not in a place with wheels. We was attacked. He'll be back all right. The fat boy shook his head. When we was coming down, I looked through one of them windows. I saw the other part of the plane. There were flames coming out of it. He looked up and down the scar. And this is what the cabin done. The fair boy reached out and touched the jagged end of a trunk. For a moment he looked interested. What happened to it, he asked. Where's it got to now? That storm dragged it out to sea. It wasn't half dangerous with all them tree trunks falling. There must have been some kids still in it. He hesitated for a moment, then spoke again. What's your name? Ralph. The fat boy waited to be asked his name in turn, but this proffer of acquaintance was not made. So we can tell one boy already is a little bit different than the norm. Feels insecure in front of Ralph, right? But he's also very intelligent and he is very mature. He's the one thinking like an adult, I believe, here. The fair boy called Ralph, smiled vaguely, stood up, and began to make his way once more toward the lagoon. The fat boy hung steadily at his shoulder. I expect there's a lot more of us scattered about. You haven't seen any others, have you? Ralph shook his head and increased his speed. Then he tripped over a branch and came down with a crash. The fat boy stood by him, breathing hard. My auntie told me not to run, he explained, on account of my asthma. Asthma? That's right. Can't catch my breath. I was the only boy in our school what had asthma, said the fat boy with a touch of pride. And I've been wearing specs since I was 3. He took off his glasses and held them out to Ralph, blinking and smiling, and then started to wipe them against his grubby windbreaker. An expression of pain and inward concentration altered the pale contours of his face. He smeared the sweat from his cheeks and quickly adjusted the spectacles on his nose. Them fruit! He glanced round the scar. Them fruit, he said. I expect. He put on his glasses, waded away from Ralph, and crouched down among the tangled foliage. I'll be out again in just a minute. Ralph disentangled himself cautiously and stole away through the branches. In a few seconds, the fat boy's grunts were behind him, and he was hurrying toward the screen that still lay between him and the lagoon. He climbed over a broken trunk and was out of the jungle. The shore was fledged with palm trees. These stood or leaned or reclined against the light, and their green feathers were 100 feet up in the air. The ground beneath them was a bank covered with coarse grass, torn everywhere by the upheavals of fallen trees, scattered with decaying coconuts and palm saplings. Behind this was the darkness of the forest proper and the open space of the scar. Ralph stood, one hand against a gray trunk, and screwed up eyes against the shimmering water. Out there, perhaps a mile away, the white surf flanked on a coral reef, and beyond that, the open sea was dark blue. Within the irregular arc of coral, the lagoon was still as a mountain lake, blue of all shades and shadowy green and purple. The beach between the palm terrace and the water was a thin stick, endlessly apparently, for to Ralph's left, the perspectives of palm and beach and water drew to a point at infinity, and always, almost visible, was the heat. I'm going to stop here for a moment so you can take a break, but they keep bringing up the presence of a scar, and I want you to think of what a scar is in reference to the human body. So if I have a scar on my arm, typically that means that there was something that happened to me that caused pain and left a mark. So when they talk about the scar on the island, they're discussing where the plane hit. Okay, so the plane hit within the canopy where there were trees, and it went kind of far and landed on the beach where it was washed out to shore. So throughout the book, they're going to continue to reference the scar on the island, which I think is really kind of a personification for how man has a tendency to destroy things. Not all man, but when you think about our earth and the first mark on our earth, we have a tendency to use and absorb resources. All right, we will come back and continue in 5 minutes, actually, whenever it is that you do.